everyone. I'm Nancy Cordes, live from the United Center in Chicago, and welcome to a special Democratic National Convention edition of America Decides. For the next 4 nights, Democrats will rally around the party's presidential pick, Vice President Kamala Harris. Tonight's theme is for the people, and we've been told that many of the speakers tonight will be paying tribute to President Joe Biden as he prepares to pass the torch to his vice president. Less than a month ago, the president was slated to close out the convention, but tonight he's set to deliver the keynote address on night 1 after he stepped aside from the presidential race at the urging of Democratic leaders. You see him there a few moments ago doing a walkthrough on stage. His wife, the First Lady, did the same. Biden is expected to tout tonight the things he and Harris have achieved together and contrast Harris's vision for the country with former President Trump's. To kick things off tonight, I am joined by 2 of the best in the business, Robert Costa and Ed O'Keefe, who are both here at the United Center as well. Ed is down on the floor. Ed, things are getting started. Set the scene for us. What should we expect tonight on night 1 of the convention, and what does the list of speakers tell us about what the party wants to convey?
Nancy, great to be with you from the floor of the United Center. This is one of the largest arenas in the country, and it's going to hold about 4,000 Democratic delegates and their friends and donors tonight. We're going to hear from a series of speakers designed to begin drawing contrast and concern with what Donald Trump is out on the stump talking about, and then a sense of sort of the future of the party, and then, of course, a big tribute to President Biden and his family and his more than 5 decades of public service. You'll hear from people like the New York Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the Maryland Congressman Jamie Raskin, 2 of perhaps the more spirited members of the Democratic Party, at least on Capitol Hill, former Secretary of State and First Lady Hillary Rodham Clinton, the first Democrat to try taking on Donald Trump, will also speak tonight. And it'll be capped by a tribute to the president and his family, with a pretty stirring tribute, we're told. First Lady will speak. His daughter, Ashley Biden, will introduce him. And then the president is expected to speak not only a little bit about his legacy, but then literally and figuratively try to hand off the baton to Vice President Harris and set the Democratic Party forward into the 78 or so days remaining in this race.
We're also going to hear from several governors tonight, lots of lawmakers, lots of union leaders. Bob, you and I have a bird's eye view up here. This room will be filled with thousands of Democratic delegates in a couple of hours. You spoke to President Biden recently. You interviewed him. His legacy is something he thinks about. How is he going to weave that into his speech tonight, and what does he want to achieve?
Based on my reporting, he is going to talk about his presidency, but put Vice President Harris front and center as his governing partner, making the case as both a friend, a confidant, and a president that she is ready for the job, that she was at his side during many key decisions. But coursing through this speech will be some of the themes of his own presidency. He believes firmly that he is someone who believes in the preservation of democracy. He's an advocate for it. And he's going to talk about, maybe not in direct terms, former President Donald Trump, but about the stakes of this election and imploring Democrats to get behind this ticket. And he has a coalition that goes back more than a half century in national politics, back to his election to the Senate in 1972. Labor, traditional Democratic constituencies. You can expect him tonight to talk about Vice President Harris in a visceral, personal way and a professional way, but also really try to rally labor, workers, traditional Democrats, working Democrats to make sure they have the same enthusiasm for her and Governor Walz as they did for him months ago.
This is really going to be such an unusual and historic night because all of the delegates in this arena were chosen. They're all here because they were loyal to Joe Biden, who until last month was the nominee. But now he is passing the torch to his vice president. And so that makes the atmosphere here really bittersweet, Ed. You spoke to one of the most well-known loyalists today. Tell us about what he said this night will be like.
Well, to your point about bittersweet, when the president was out here a little while ago doing his sound check, one of the reporters asked him, is this a bittersweet moment? The president looked at him and just said, it's going to be a memorable moment. So perhaps a slight acknowledgement that it is bittersweet, because remember, he didn't get a convention of his own 4 years ago, at least one that involved thousands of people. Earlier today, we spoke with the man who succeeded Biden in the Senate, Christopher Coons, one of his closest confidants on Capitol Hill, about this moment for the Biden family, for the Delaware Democratic Party that he's been a part of for so long, and whether or not this is exactly how it was supposed to end. Take a listen. How hard do you think it is for him to go out this way, knowing that this was all being organized for him originally?
This was his choice. He always was clear-eyed that the most important thing he could do was to make sure that Donald Trump isn't reelected. In 2020, I'll remind you, we had a very different convention. It was virtual because we were in the middle of a terrible pandemic, a terrible economic near collapse, and then right before his inauguration, the assault on the Capitol, he became president. Kamala Harris became vice president in a really tough time. He's going to get to stand on the stage tonight and reflect on those last 4 years and just how much he's gotten done.
Coons said that the Democratic Party of Delaware this morning at breakfast all gathered to sort of swap stories about Biden, his legacy, what he's meant to them, what he's meant to the country and to the party. We can expect some pretty emotional scenes from them down here on the floor later tonight when the president and first lady address the crowd. Nancy.
Yeah, and White House officials insist the president is in a good mood and he's taking this all in stride. We'll get a chance to judge for ourselves when he speaks later tonight. Bob, I want to ask you about the Republicans, because initially President Trump said he was going to lay low over the last couple of weeks until this convention was over. He didn't want to counter-program. Now he's counter-programming like there's no tomorrow. He did an event in York, Pennsylvania today. He did an event in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania over the weekend. Why the change in strategy?
Well, they're sitting up straight right now inside of the Trump campaign, and they're bringing in new people like his former advisor, Corey Lewandowski, to give it more of a war room mentality, because they see the polls. They think it's a tight race. They think former President Trump is well positioned to win this race when you talk to the Trump high command. At the same time, they see Vice President Harris uniting the Democratic Party, doing well in battleground polls, and they want former President Trump out on the campaign trail, making sure his core voters are animated for him and participating. And one thing that's interesting, it's been brought back to me in conversations recently, how in August 2016, Trump seemed done against Secretary Clinton, who's speaking tonight at the convention here in Chicago. And many Trump people at the time thought the race was effectively over. He was able to focus in September and October of 2016 and ultimately win the White House. So they're looking now to focus as the fall approaches. Can Trump get a bit more of a message on the economy, a sharper attack on Vice President Harris? Can he make the border an issue more than ever? And that's going to be a challenge for him, because the Democrats, as every party does, get a bump out of every convention. But it is only August. I just spoke to Bill Daley at Manny's Deli, one of the great spots in Chicago, and he said this is a lifetime between now and November.
Right. A month ago, we thought that Joe Biden would be the nominee. Robert Costa here with me, Ed O'Keefe on the floor. Thank you both so much. We'll be talking to you both in a little bit. Former President Donald Trump just spoke to CBS News. Here is some of his exclusive conversation with our Caitlin Huey-Burns.
Mr. President, great to see you. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you.
You just gave a speech on the economy. You talked about lowering taxes for families. Do you support a child tax credit?
Well, I was the one that did the child tax credit, and I do support it, and I want to have it. But we're going to
$5,000, as J.D. Vance suggested?
We have 2 forms, even 3 forms, and as you know, it gets negotiated with Congress. But we're doing the maximum. My daughter Ivanka was very involved in that, if you remember. She wanted it more than anybody. She understood it better than anybody, wanted it more than anybody. And the answer is yes, we will take care of children in this country. We're going to take care of our seniors. We're going to have no tax on Social Security for our seniors. We're going to have no tax on tips, which was sort of stolen from us, as you know, by Kamala. But we're going to take care of our people. But we're also going to make sure that we are a great manufacturing hub again. That's why we're here. This plant, which would have trouble if things that we want to do don't happen. We have to create our industrial base. We have to create jobs in this country. We just can't keep losing them. And as you heard, 350,000 jobs were lost this year in manufacturing. That's hard to believe. That's a hard thing to believe.
I do want to ask about your opponent, Kamala Harris, the vice president. You have criticized her appearance. You've criticized her intelligence. Is that the message to win over those moderate voters that you're going to need in the middle?
No, I don't think so. I think that the message is what a bad job they've done. I mean, if you look at this economy, if you look at inflation, and, you know, I love this country. I have to do what it takes to win. I have to get this country going because we're going to lose our country. We're very close to losing our country. And if you look at what inflation, which was caused by them, with all of the things that they did, I handed them essentially no inflation. And inflation has destroyed our country. It's known, you know, inflation is known throughout the generations as a country buster. Well, we've suffered some of the worst inflation that any country has ever suffered. And we're not going to let that happen. We have to stop them. So I'm not a fan of hers because what she did is she actually signed the Inflation Reduction Act. It was her vote. It was a tie vote. She, as vice president, had the final decision, and she signed it. That is what gave us, and their bad energy policy is what gave us tremendous inflation, which frankly is killing our country.
Does the fact that she is a woman change your calculus about how you approach this race?
No, it doesn't, except that it's pretty unfair. I'm running against one person. He got 14 million votes. He's running and doing well, and perhaps he had a bad debate, perhaps I had a good debate, but he's running, and that's my opponent. All of a sudden they say, listen, we don't like you anymore because you're losing by a lot, so we're taking you out, we're going to give somebody else. So right in the middle of the campaign, really much more toward the end of the campaign, they take somebody out, they put in a new person who got there with no votes. It's very, I mean, it's very, it's a terrible thing for our country. They talk about destroying democracy. They are destroying democracy. They take somebody who didn't get one vote, and the bosses of the Democrat Party just put her there. I think she's going to do very badly. Actually, I think she's going to be easier than Biden, because when people hear that she believes in a Marxist philosophy, which she does, people didn't know all the things that we're bringing out right now. They didn't know it. Her father is a Marxist professor. She believes in Marxism. This country will not sustain that. This country is not going to go for that.
All right, you've been listening to Caitlin Huey-Burns' exclusive interview with former President Donald Trump as he claims that Kamala Harris adheres to a Marxist philosophy. She has never professed that. But nevertheless, you're going to hear more of that interview in our next hour on the Daily Report with John Dickerson. So stick around for that. We're going to go now, though, to CBS News Executive Director of Elections and Surveys, Anthony Salvanto, who joins us from New York. Anthony, it's so good to see you. You released a big new poll over the weekend. Tell us what you found when it comes to the way voters view Harris and how it compares to the way that they saw Joe Biden.
Hey, Nancy. Yeah, and that's central, right? He's going to speak tonight. And the thing it's going to set up here for Kamala Harris is just how she compares, where she's similar and where she's different. So start with this. Democrats, 3/4 of them rate his presidency as excellent or good. That compares very differently to voters overall, majority of whom say fair or poor. You just heard he was trailing Donald Trump before Harris became the nominee, and that's one reason why. But what's also interesting here is that Democrats have actually moved in a more positive direction on Joe Biden since the spring. And for context, Nancy, it wasn't so much that they didn't like him or his policies. It was that they didn't think he could win. And so that was important when many of them said that he ought to step aside. And what that sets up finally here, Nancy, is this balancing act that Kamala Harris is going to have to really engage in as she talks about how similar or how different she is from Joe Biden. And here's what I mean. Bulk of voters say they think she's mostly the same in policies and views, but not entirely the same. Well, you saw that Democrats still like him, so she's got to play to that. But, of course, the Trump campaign is going to try to tie her to Joe Biden in that space on entirely the same. And that's where that fight within the fight, I think, is going to play out, Nancy.
Anthony, you also found that the gender gap is widening with Harris as the nominee. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, and I think that's probably going to become, if not the defining thing, one of the defining things of this election by gender gap. Here's what I mean. More women voting for Harris, more men voting for Trump. But here's a why part of that, Nancy, and that is that more women think that Kamala Harris will fight for people like them. And this is important, too, getting back to this idea of the economy, women give her more benefit of the doubt on the economy than they gave to Joe Biden. So Democrats have to close that gap with Donald Trump because he has the advantage on it. But it seems to then start with women voters, where right now on the economy, she's just about even with him, something Joe Biden never was, Nancy.
And we'll see what that looks like after this convention, because a third of voters still say they don't know much about Kamala Harris and her policies. We'll see if that changes after the 4 nights that we're about to experience. Anthony Salvanto, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Straight ahead, Harris campaign co-chair Cedric Richmond joins me for more. You're streaming America Decides live from Chicago on night 1 of the Democratic National Convention. Stick around.
I have fought for children and survivors of sexual assault. I fought against transnational criminal organizations. I took on the biggest banks and helped take down one of the biggest for-profit colleges. I know a predator when I see one.
The contrast between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris could not be more clear. I mean, Kamala Harris has supported our bipartisan border security bill that Donald Trump told Senate Republicans to run away from.
Welcome back to our special coverage of the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. It is night 1. That was Arizona Senator Mark Kelly on Face the Nation yesterday, looking to cast Donald Trump as a divider. Cedric Richmond is here with me now. He is the Harris campaign co-chair and a former senior advisor to President Biden. So good to see you,
Thanks for
Cedric.
having me.
Thank you for being here. So President Biden speaks tonight. This must be a difficult night for him in some ways. This is not how he expected a month ago that this convention would go. How much of his speech is about himself and his legacy, and how much of it is about his vice president?
Well, I think 100% of the speech will be about the American people and how he's played and how he's worked to improve the lives of American people. So if you go back to, let's say, 4 years ago when he decided to run, it wasn't about him. It was about the fact that Donald Trump was a threat to the future of America and he needed to be defeated. So President Biden came off the sidelines and he ran and he won. And he's made every day of his presidency about the American people, not about himself. And so if you look at it, the decision he made almost 30 days ago, that again was about the future of the country, it was about the American people. And he was not the beneficiary of that decision. And so he decided to pass the baton on to his vice president, Kamala Harris, so that she could fight for the future that Americans deserve without the distractions of fighting both Democrats and Republicans. And again, he has sacrificed his ego, his political future, because he's so concerned about those Americans waking up every day just fighting their butts off just to make ends meet. And so I think that the speech will be about that, but it will also be about the success that they've had over the last 3.5 years. He'll remind people of the mess that he inherited from President Trump, and he'll talk about how we got to where we are today and his accomplishments.
You worked as a senior advisor inside the White House, so you worked alongside Vice President Harris for years. I want to ask you about this deep dive that the New York Times did this weekend into her role as vice president, her successes, the challenges. And what I found so interesting was this quote from Ron Klain, who was a former White House chief of staff. He said, "We were all united behind the idea that she should be successful. We just didn't find the path to do it. I don't think we did a good enough job of selling her." Why do you think that it was hard to sell her? Was that your experience as well?
Well, I don't think it was about selling her. I think it was a couple things. One, about defending her, and two, recognizing the world in which she inherited when she stepped into the vice presidency. I think she was the first person to have a traveling press corps with her as vice president, and I think the expectations were very high. I think that she was very methodical and very thoughtful about the role and the assignments, and she wanted to be the best partner she could to Joe Biden. And remember, when we came in, it was in the height of COVID. People were dying. You couldn't go to their funerals. You couldn't say goodbye at a hospital. All of those things. And so the number one goal in the beginning was getting vaccines out, get the economy back going. And I think that she played a great role of being his partner, getting the votes for the American Recovery Act and doing all of those things. And so, no, we didn't do the job we should have in talking about how successful she was in making sure we passed that legislation, making sure that we were able to do the things that we wanted to do. But I think we underestimated, the White House underestimated the amount of defense that she would need and the attacks that she would face simply because of who she was. And so, you know, that's how I would think about it.
So you're saying there really was no script for a woman as vice president, a woman of color in particular, stepping into that role and how to position them?
Yeah, I don't think there was a script for a woman. And I think that she was playing such a supporting character. She was playing the president's partner. He really, and I've been in those meetings, he really respected her decisions and her thoughts. And we saw him lean into it when it was time to pick a Supreme Court justice. And she was there and she was all in. Mm-hmm. And I just don't think that we let the world know how much she was involved in all of the decisions. And she didn't make the ultimate decision, mm-hmm. but in the debate process and the thoughtfulness process, she was always there. She was always involved. And I think that that's a great introduction to being president. It's a great view of what the president has to do. And I know she has the brilliance and the intellect to do it. And I think she has the compassion and the concern for the American people to do it well.
You were part of the vetting team that looked at all of Vice President Harris's top choices for running mate, and she ultimately chose Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. How much of a discussion was it in your meetings, Governor Walz's 1995 DUI arrest and the way that his House campaign described it in a misleading way when he was first running for office in 2005?
Well, we know about it. But what we were focused on is how are we going to deliver for the American people and who is the best running mate to help make sure that this economy works for everybody, not just the wealthy. And how do we get, like the vice president says all the time, how do we help families not just get by, but get ahead? And that was our overarching concern. That's what we drilled down on. Of course, he talked about the incident. He talked about he's never had a drink since. And he's talked about how he learned from it and how he focuses every day on helping people. And that is the common thread that runs through this campaign, is that this is not about us. We're going to be okay. But this is about those families out there every day. This is about our seniors paying a lot for health care. This is about making sure that people have opportunity. And more important, what Tim Walz brought was the desire to unify this country, whether you're Democrat, Republican, black or white, rural or urban. We're all in this together, and we can all rise together. And that joy that he does it with, combined with her joy, you see the chemistry immediately. And then the contrast. He was a teacher. He was a coach. He was in the armed services. He served in Congress. And he's going to be a great asset when it's time to go to the Hill and pass legislation. So it really was a match made in heaven.
Well, they spent all weekend together, and we'll be hearing from him on night 3 of the convention. Cedric Richmond, campaign co-chair, thanks so much for being with me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Kamala Harris rolled out her economic priorities should she win the election, but how is the plan being received so far? We're going to discuss when we come back. You're streaming America Decides on night 1 of the Democratic National Convention. Stick around.
If you entrust me with the presidency, I will draw on the best of us, not the worst. I'll be an ally of the light, not the darkness. It's time for us, for we the people, to come together.
The guard is moving in. There's some fighting. I see one guardsman, several guardsmen using their rifles as clubs, hitting the demonstrators.
Wow. That was the scene outside the 1968 Democratic National Convention here in Chicago when anti-Vietnam War protesters marched in the streets. Over half a century later, Democrats gathering here in the Windy City are dealing with protests again, this time over the war in Gaza. Lilia Luciano joins us now. Lilia, you've been out there all day. Tell us what the status is of the protests. Were they as large as they were expected to be? And what should we expect throughout the rest of the week?
Well, Nancy, very different from the 1968 protests so far. Today's protests have been very peaceful. There was a massive gathering, thousands of people. Bear with me, it's hard for me to count numbers of people, but at some point they were talking about 25,000 people expected. That could be throughout the week. Certainly there weren't 25,000 people here at Union Park, but there were thousands upon thousands of people marching through the streets. They still are. There's still about another hour left of this protest. Everything we saw was a very organized protest. Police here in Chicago trained with federal agencies on de-escalation, on making sure that there weren't violent clashes. We've heard from the mayor, we've heard from other city leaders, we've heard from the Secret Service leader here in Chicago, all saying, look, police here in Chicago are making sure that they respect people's First Amendment rights, but they will not tolerate vandalism or violence. We have not seen any of that so far, but there are other protests planned out throughout the week, including one tomorrow at the Israeli consulate, which authorities are keeping a close eye on. There are protests and protesters here calling for abortion rights, for the rights of immigrants, for the rights of the LGBTQ community, and of course, the most massive showing has been to end the war in Gaza, and they're also calling for the U.S. to impose an arms embargo immediately on Israel.
Lilia, was there any opportunity for these protesters to interact with the thousands of delegates who are here or any of the politicians who are speaking here?
You know, that's something that I was asking some of the organizers. I asked, hey, has the has the DNC leadership or the campaigns or the nominee or anybody been in contact with you guys? And they told me no, they have not talked directly to leadership at the DNC. And they did say that some of the delegates, thousands of delegates, many of them are in support of what they're manifesting against, are in support of their protests, but that there hasn't been that opportunity yet. And there is a perimeter wall that was created around the arena to make sure that the protests did not go into the area where the delegates are. I mean, that said, there could have been delegates who came out here, but not officially. I mean, I didn't hear from people saying, look, they came and talked to us, but that's something that could change throughout the week. And what they're saying is if we show up in large numbers, we expect that there will be more pressure on the administration and what I asked some of the protesters, what needs to happen? They said, you know, right now it's a ceasefire and it's stopping military aid to Israel. And that way Democrats could get our votes come November.
But bottom line, on day one of the convention, it was a peaceful protest, which is good news for the law enforcement authorities who have been preparing for this for months. Lilia Luciano, thank you so much. Just a few days ago, Kamala Harris released her first major policy initiative, her plans for the economy. A reporter asked the vice president how she would pay for these policies if elected. Take a listen.
I think it's a mistake for any person who talks about public policy to not critically evaluate how you measure the return on investment. When you are strengthening neighborhoods, strengthening communities, and in particular the economy of those communities, and investing in a broad-based economy, everybody benefits, and it pays for itself in that way.
So no specific answer there, but Adriana Diaz is here. She has been covering the DNC in Chicago, and she's been covering this issue. Adriana, so good to see you.
Great to see you,
back in your stomping grounds here in Chicago. So you've been talking to voters here, and top of mind for many of them is the economy. What are they saying to you about their situation and how they feel about what they heard from Kamala Harris?
Well, Nancy, we spent the afternoon outside of a discount supermarket and across the street from a Dollar Tree, and every single person we spoke to told us that they are hurting. And we've all heard this before, you know, we've all gone out and talked to voters, but there was a level of emotion, I think, underlying everyone's answer today. People feel they don't know where to go, they don't know what to do. You know, one woman we spoke to said that typically she used to go to one supermarket to do all of her shopping, and now things are so bad that instead of going to one place, she has to go to 3 or 4 to pick and choose and hunt for the best prices she can get. She said she still supports Harris, thinks Harris will be good for the economy, and here's what she said.
Why do you think Kamala Harris will be better for food prices? Well, first off, she's a Democrat. She's a Democrat? Yeah, she's a Democrat. That's why I resound with the Democrat. I don't know. Like, I know I'm going to vote for her for sure. Like, are you voting for her or are you voting against Trump? That's a very good question. That would be probably against Trump.
You want someone like Trump?
Like Trump. Especially now, you know, people, we're under this control.
Things are out of control?
Yeah, no respect.
So that gentleman is a Trump supporter, and he really talked about chaos. He thinks things are in chaos, not just the economy, but society. And he says that President Biden doesn't have a good handle of things, like, in his view, former President Trump did when Trump was in office. So he thinks Trump will be better for the economy and better for society overall.
You know, our new poll that we released this weekend shows Trump still has an edge when it comes to the economy, though interestingly, Adriana, Harris does a bit better in that poll than Biden did. How big of a focus do you think the economy will be here at this convention, knowing that it's the #1 issue for voters?
That's exactly right, Nancy. I mean, we're here in the arena. Behind us is the stage, and the economy will be center stage tonight. Voters we spoke to repeatedly said that the economy was top of mind. Our new CBS News poll said that the economy was the #1 issue that they're looking at, only followed by inflation, which is another economic issue. So it's something that people really care about and is kind of pervasive through society. We went to a Dollar Tree, a dollar store, and spoke to the manager, and this person said that they've had foot traffic that's gone up. They have been busy. There are a lot of first-time customers who are going, and even the dollar store has had to raise prices themselves. So it's not just $1. Now things at this particular store cost $1.25. Wow. So everyone is feeling it, and you know the team, the ticket here is going to try to prove that they are the ones that can fix the economy.
Such a good reminder that even amidst these positive economic indicators, wages going up, inflation coming down, a lot of people still aren't feeling it.
Everyone we spoke to today is not feeling it.
Adriana Diaz, thank you so much. See you again a little later in the night. And coming up next, we're going to bring in our political panel for more analysis from the Democratic National Convention. You are streaming America Decides on night 1 of the DNC. Stick around.
We begin a new chapter tonight. Yes, the world is watching what we do. Yes, America's destiny is ours to choose. So let's be stronger together, my fellow Americans.
I think the kids call that cringy today. That lighter moment from the 1996 convention has found itself going viral. Every 4 years, President Biden, the Obamas, and the Clintons are among the high-profile speakers who will be here at this week's convention. Will they dance? Won't they? Let me just give you a lay of the land so you know where we're standing right now. Over my shoulder, that's the stage. So you see that lit up circle, podium in the middle of it. That's where you'll be watching speakers all night long over the next 4 days. And I want to take you back now to 8 years ago, a reminder of what Michelle Obama had to say on that stage.
When someone is cruel or acts like a bully, you don't stoop to their level. No, our motto is, when they go low, we go high.
So, are they going to be going high this time around? Let's bring in our political panel to discuss. We've got Braxton Booker and Shelby Talcott here in the United Center. Braxton is national political correspondent for Politico, and Shelby is a politics reporter for Semaphore. Okay, Braxton, let's start with you.
Sure.
Are they going to go low? Are they going to go high? Are they going to go somewhere in between?
I think they're probably going to go somewhere in between. I feel like when they go low, we go high. It's a little passe, which is why you're going to see some of the people on stage today, like Jasmine Crockett, who famously got into this verbal mix-up with Marjorie Taylor Greene on a House Oversight Committee, where I think a lot of Democrats, it's a signal that a lot of Democrats feel like that is a little passe. The politics of our time now call for politicians and Democrats to go much more forcefully direct at Republicans. So I think you're going to see this passing of the torch, and I feel like some of the speakers on the stage tonight are going to reflect that.
And you can pick and choose who gets to go high and who has to go low to compensate. Shelby, I want to ask you about J.D. Vance. In Philadelphia today, he said that Vice President Harris has been promising action, but that she hasn't taken any action in years. Let's take a listen to what he said.
She says that on day one, she wants to make groceries and homes more affordable for American citizens. Well, Kamala Harris, where have you been? Because you've been vice president for about 1,300 days. Day one was 3.5 years ago. You should have been doing your job then.
So what's the strategy here, Shelby, with both Vance and former President Trump really going after Kamala Harris in a very forceful, very personal way?
Yeah, this is one of the big strategies from Donald Trump's campaign, and it is tying her to the Biden administration, reminding voters that she is in office right now. And so we've heard from J.D. Vance, as you just heard there, and also from Donald Trump, and also from his surrogates that are here in Chicago this week, that if Kamala Harris is going to promise X, Y, and Z, she's been in office for 3.5 years. She should have done this already. And so that's been one of the main arguments we've heard from Donald Trump's campaign as they have tried to sort of solidify these attack lines against Harris that so far they've struggled to really stick, but they're sticking with it, and they believe that this honeymoon period, as they call it, is coming to a close, and so they are going, full in on these sorts of arguments.
Braxton, the last time that the Democrats had a woman nominee, Hillary Clinton, 8 years ago, she's planning to speak tonight, there was a heavy focus on the fact that this was groundbreaking. She talked about breaking the glass ceiling. We all remember her wearing that white pantsuit, striding out onto the stage, talking about what a new era it would be if she were to be elected. 8 years later, Kamala Harris does not speak about that at all. She really doesn't talk about what it would mean for her to be the first woman president, first woman of color to be president. Why the change?
Look, I think you're going to see her, and what you're seeing right now is she's taken a page out of the Obama playbook, right? Obama did not talk a lot about race, with some exceptions, when, of course, the big speech in Philadelphia where he talked about race in America. But largely, he was talking to middle America. He was talking to some portions of white America that maybe felt uncomfortable about this change. And I think you're seeing the vice president lean fully into that. When Hillary 8 years ago was running as the nominee, it was all about gender, all about I'm with her. And I think the Democrats have taken a page out of that book that, look, Kamala Harris is not hiding her gender. Right. It's clear and present. So she wants to focus on the policies and make sure those policies are connecting with the American people.
But let's not send a signal to anyone that this might be new or scary or different. Let's downplay that.
I also just think America's beyond that a little bit. I don't think the voters are certainly scared of who Kamala Harris is. They either want to vote for her or they're considering voting for Donald Trump, but there's no need to lean forcefully into that.
Shelby, one of the names that we're going to be hearing from tonight, we learned, is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She is the congresswoman, of course, from New York, one of the members of the squad. Republicans have already been looking to use her in ads. Talk about the choice to put her on night one.
I think it's really notable for a few reasons. First of all, it is an acknowledgement to the more left-wing faction of the Democratic Party who have so often made life for President Joe Biden and this administration a little bit more difficult. And it's also representative of just how united this Democratic Party feels and is. It is sort of reminiscent from last month at the RNC when we saw everybody united behind Donald Trump. Even this left-wing faction of the party in Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is here speaking. She is behind Kamala Harris, and these are people who, again, made life difficult for the White House. So it's notable for a few reasons, but particularly because of that.
And she is someone who was vocal in her support of President Biden right until the end when he pulled out of the race. Shelby Talcott, Braxton Booker, thank you both so much. I know we'll be talking again shortly. President Biden is certain to discuss his decision to pass the torch to Kamala Harris while speaking at the Democratic convention tonight. The latest on what we expect him to say next. You're streaming America Decides on night one of the Democratic National Convention. We'll be right back.
I am keenly aware of the fears and the frustrations of the world in which we live. It is all too easy, isn't it, to play on these emotions? But I do not intend to do so.
Welcome back to our continuing coverage of night one of the Democratic National Convention here in Chicago. Our Caitlin Huey-Burns is in York, Pennsylvania, where former President Trump held a campaign event earlier today. And then Caitlin had a one-on-one interview with the former president. So, Caitlin, it's great to see you. Tell us more about what he had to say and what your impressions were of the conversation.
Hey, Nancy, it's great to see you. Donald Trump is offering a week of counter-programming to the DNC, and today he's here in Pennsylvania, which is a must-win state for him. His remarks today were focused on the economy, but in our interview, I asked about these attacks that he's been making on Kamala Harris, criticizing her appearance, criticizing her intelligence, and I asked if those are the messages that he wants to send or should send to engage and turn out voters who are in the middle or on the fence. And he essentially said that he's not changing his strategy, that he wants to call her out, and that he's essentially going to continue to do so. Nancy, it was also interesting because we asked about his medical records. He is now the oldest candidate in this race, and if he wins the presidency, he will be older than Biden is at the end of his next term if elected. So he insisted that he will release all of his medical records, so we will continue to follow up on that. I also asked if he had any regrets about the overturning of Roe versus Wade, and he said that he did not, that this is now an issue for the states. Of course, we know, and you're at the Democratic National Convention, that this is a really animating issue for Democrats and especially suburban women voters. And we've seen a big gender gap in our new polling between himself and Kamala Harris.
Caitlin, even some of the former president's closest allies have been urging him publicly not to go after the vice president's appearance, not to make fun of her name, not to say that she's dumb. Did he show any sign that he is hearing those people and considering what they have to say?
No, Nancy, and it's interesting. I asked him specifically about comments we heard from over the weekend from Lindsey Graham, who is a top ally of the former president. They play golf together. And Lindsey Graham said over the weekend that, Trump, the showman, in his words, will not win the election. And I asked Donald Trump about that, and he criticized Lindsey Graham and said that, he's not going to take his advice.
Interesting. We're looking forward to seeing more of your interview coming up. Caitlin Huey-Burns in York, Pennsylvania. Thanks so much. And that's going to do it for now. As we've been reporting, President Biden is expected to talk about his legacy and back Vice President Harris's push for the White House a little later tonight. CBS News special coverage of the Democratic National Convention will continue all evening long, and I'll be back at 7 p.m. Eastern. But for now, the Daily Report with John Dickerson is up next.